So the Acolyte's 7th episode comes out Tuesday evening. It's the second to last, 7th of 8 episodes. And I would say the show overall has been hugely disappointing. It feels very cheap. It feels very poorly written, and really the central gimmick, the twin plotline, is quite weak, the weakest thing about it. I think there was a good show in there somewhere, potentially, if they had followed the Sith character, who was fully revealed in the 5th episode. If they had followed that character, I think it could have been a really interesting show, especially if you'd had sort of a police procedural where the Jedi were investigating these murders of Jedi. And I talked about that a little bit in my last video, but I think there was something there that could have been really dug into the sort of the hidden Sith in this time period, and brought really one of the first real mystery into the Star Wars universe. There is some detective stuff that goes on in Andor, which I think is really good, but that's not really the main focus of it. So I do think there was a lot of potential here that was really squandered. I think that the 14% Rotten Tomatoes score is the result of review bombing. Now, a lot of people that don't like the show get mad when I say that, but I think review bombing is a real thing. Denying that it's a real thing is silly. Review bombing, however, is not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of people write it off as some horrible trolling, only, and I'll get to that in a minute with this Mary Sue article, but I think review bombing is often the only way that consumers can make their voices heard. And I think that, this is going to tie into what I talk about with this article that we read, but I think that, production companies, corporations, creators, all the people involved in making these TV shows and movies ignore user review scores at their peril, because they are important. If you look at something like Helldivers 2 recently, when Sony was implementing the PSN requirement, so that even if you're on Steam, you were going to need a PlayStation account, and that wasn't even available till all regions. So lots and lots of people were going to lose access to this game that they'd purchased. I think that it helped that there was some bad press around this, but I think it also helped that a lot of that press was able to say, look at all these Steam user reviews and how it's gone from a really positive to a really negative user review score. So I think that there is power in that sort of consumer activism, consumer voices joining together in what I can only describe as a version of organized labor. No, it's organized consumerism, right? It's a similar thing to organized labor in that we don't have a lot of power as consumers, except for with our wallets and our user reviews. Really, word of mouth is very powerful, and it can go both ways. If people are extremely positive about something, that can drive a lot of hype. Just like obviously critical reviews matter and people listen to those, user reviews matter also. And in a lot of ways, especially in this day and age, in some ways, I think they matter even more. I think looking at both critically is very, very useful if you're a consumer, or if you're just interested in this shit like I am. So this is an article by Rachel Ulatowski in the Mary Sue. The Mary Sue has interesting content. It's the Acolyte showrunner has the right take on all the review bombing. So we'll just get right into this. The Acolyte showrunner Leslie Headland recently addressed the review bombing of the show, pointing out that it's rather inconsequential because no one is actually going to take such blatant trolling seriously. Now that's interesting. Right off the bat, first sentence, blatant trolling. So they've established the narrative here, right? The narrative is not that this show is divisive or that some people like it, some people hate it. The narrative is that the only people who review this show negatively are trolls, blatant trolls. The only reason that its score is this low is trolling. That's the only reason. That's the narrative. Established narrative, no question. No like setting up, well, maybe this part of the show is controversial or divisive. It's just trolling, and it gets worse. After creating the award-winning comedy series Russian Doll, Headland created the most recent Star Wars original series, The Acolyte. The series follows twin sisters Osha and May as they become entangled with the Jedi and Sith after the destruction of their home. It has received stellar reviews from critics who enjoy the refreshing and unique premise of the show, its diversity, and its exciting incorporation of legends and Star Wars lore. Episode 5 especially drew praise, as some Star Wars fans hailed its brutal and epic Jedi battle as one of the best in the franchise. So there you go. Critics loved it. They love it because it's refreshing and unique. The premise is unique. It doesn't borrow from Parent Trap or any of these other shows it's derivative of, or movies. It's diversity. They love that. Critics love that, and it's exciting incorporations of legends and Star Wars lore. I won't deny that there are some kind of cool things introduced in the Acolyte, like the Cortosis stuff. I didn't even know about that metal, but it's really interesting. And again, I think the Sith character is a fascinating character, and there are some cool little bits and pieces from legends and whatnot. However, refreshing is not the word I would use for this as a critic, but I'm in the minority. Unfortunately, even before it premiered, the Acolyte got on the radar of the anti-woke mob. While it's not uncommon for trolls to lose it over any show deemed woke, they've seemed even more unhinged than usual over this series. It has turned into an all-out obsession for many who have been review bombing the show, harassing and launching racist attacks on the cast and... Am I overdoing the R rolls? Cast and crew, writing death threats to Wikipedia editors, and devoting hours every week to religiously watching new episodes and melting down over every little detail. What's that link to? Fortunately, Headland isn't very concerned about their trolling. So, again, this is all narrative building, right? This whole section is just building this narrative that the only people who don't like it are obsessive anti-woke trolls who just hate it. Now, granted, the most passionate anti-woke trolls out there are probably giving this show bad reviews, and there is always some truth to this narrative stuff, right? Just like there's always truth to stereotypes. There are people harassing the show creators or Wikipedia editors. That stuff's going on social media. Harassment on social media is like every day I get on social media, someone who's harassing me there. I don't write articles about it because it's not worth it. I do sometimes feed the trolls. But the point is this is narrative building. This is not an actual critique or analysis of what's going into what's actually going into this, which is, the show actually has legitimate problems, and a lot of the reviews are not just harassment, they're not just racist, they're not just sexist. A lot of the reviews are actually about the things that are wrong with this show, from the really, really cheesy writing to the bafflement over where all the money's gone and so forth. There's just, as I've said in many different videos and articles that I've written about this, the show is deeply, deeply flawed. I don't hate every bit of it, but it is extremely flawed, and it deserves a much lower critical score. Frankly, I cannot believe that the critical score is so high, and it's like these articles don't pay attention to that because they're building a narrative. The critical score in their mind is probably too low. 83%, that's not great. But it's a lot better than 14%, so the narrative has to be constructed that the 14% is only due to trolls, racists, misogynists, and the 83% is the more accurate version of this show's quality. Now, I don't believe that for a second. I think both sides are exaggerated because this is a culture war. And my understanding of how culture war works is that the negative audience scores are definitely being driven by, there are troll elements, and those are driving those numbers down, because this show, in my opinion, is not worse than Obi-Wan Kenobi or Book of Boba Fett or Ahsoka. All these shows are about, like, they're just super mediocre as far as I'm concerned, and those shows don't have as low critical scores, or audience scores, but I don't think their critical scores are as high either. So I think there's this on the other side where the reviewers are inflating the quality of this show, right? And then there's all this stuff with Rotten Tomatoes that we won't even get into, but whoa, okay. In an interview with Collider, Headland responded to the review bombing of her show and why she's not overly bothered by it. For one, she and her team saw the review bombing coming. Bigots are getting fairly predictable with their trolling, to the point that many viewers don't even read or care about audience reviews anymore. See, this is narrative building in. Nothing about how critic scores are often mistrusted, just as much or more so. And many, many viewers don't believe those, only that they don't believe the audience scores. Because fake poor reviews are so common, Headland stated, "Oh yes, everybody knows what review bombing is like. Truly, when the show first came out, my publicist was like, okay with the review. I was like, does anybody take that seriously anymore?" She she went on to explain why she thinks review bombing is especially pointless with a Star Wars show. Headland understands the point is supposedly to deter people from watching the series because potential users may be concerned about seeing a meager audience score on I'm getting myself confused reading it this way, but that's a really weird sentence. However, anyone who's a part of Star Wars fandom is going to be familiar with review bombing. It has become customary for fake fans, only fake fans can dislike this stuff, to start losing their minds anytime the franchise acknowledges women or shows hints of inclusivity. Yeah, all those fake fans, they just hated Princess Leia so much, or all the strong female characters in Andor. I'm just going to remind people that diversity or women in Star Wars has never been the problem, and most people who are upset by what we'll call wokeness in Star Wars isn't because there are women in Star Wars. It is because of how they are included, not just in Star Wars, but in so many other things, where instead of just organically including like compelling, interesting characters with flaws and everything else, it's like this corporate, weird, robotic version of what strong women are supposed to be, and diversity that feels like checkboxes rather than an organic. I go back to Andor because this was a show that was received extremely well by critics and audiences, and I think it's if you're saying that audience scores never matter, but then you look at Andor and it has really good audience scores, then you have to ask yourself, why does Andor have great audience scores despite having, I think I counted like 9 compelling female characters of different racial backgrounds, a diverse cast that includes white, black, Asian, and Hispanic actors, an LGBTQ relationship, specifically a lesbian relationship, and really, really, really left-wing politics, okay? How is it that Andor is managing to have audience scores, which I'm just, because I want to, Rotten Tomatoes, Andor. Let's look at these real quick. 96% critic, 87% audience score. Why? If Star Wars is just the target of trolls and racists and misogynists, why is this series with so much diversity, so many female characters, why does it have an 87% audience score? Why doesn't it have a 14% audience score? It's frankly, this is a revolutionary show about deeply left-wing ideas, and yet somehow doesn't have a 14%. Do audience scores just not matter, or do you only say that when your audience scores are shit? All right. I got lost there. I got on a rant. It has become customary for fake fans to start losing their minds anytime the franchise acknowledges women. Just acknowledges them. Can you find me one Star Wars show without women, or one Star Wars movie without women, please? Can you just find me that, and then we'll circle back here? Or hints of inclusivity. Since Star Wars fans are well aware of fake reviews, the review bombing would only potentially work with complete newcomers to the franchise, who are hard to come by with a franchise as popular as this one. So then they're just pointless, right? Yeah. Headland explained, I understand the point of it, which is that the average viewer would look at the site and say, oh, the user review is really low. But I think that if you're in the Star Wars fandom, I think you already know what review bombing is. So I guess if you're totally... Okay, she's just... Why did the author need to summarize what she was about to say in the last paragraph? Instead of just having to fucking say it, man. Jesus, be a little economical here. The Acolyte showrunner concluded, it's not that it's not concerning, but I think it's pretty expected. The critic score is a solid 83%, while the trolls managed to get the audience score down to 14%, with tens of thousands of nonsensical one-sentence or one-word half-star reviews, none of which are included here, because this author apparently similar to Headland, the show's creator, doesn't care what the user review scores are. Doesn't care so much they made a whole article about it. User review scores are only useful as a barometer. The 14% is nothing. The usefulness of it is that it's so much lower than the critical review score. And you can see the opposite at times, right? The opposite, where critics really don't like something, but audiences really do. Are they just being trolls? What's the deal there? It tends to be that, well, it tends often to be that just critics and audiences don't always see eye to eye. That's just normal. That's just to be expected. And so I think it's really useful when you see something that critics and audiences like. You pretty much are gonna like it unless it's that rarest of items like Hitman on Netflix, the new movie Hitman, where audiences and critics both give it like 95% or something, and it was actual dog shit. That movie sucked. And I don't understand why people liked it so much. And I wrote about it, and I made a video about it, so you can look those up. But that movie got such universal acclaim, I am still super confused. Usually, there will be one group or the other that I'll agree with. I'll be like, yeah, man, I don't agree with critics on this one. I think this was a pretty fun movie. And it's usually, oftentimes, it's more of like a lowbrow action movie or something. Or like, I really like something. Audiences don't love it, but The Green Knight, for instance, audience didn't love that movie. I thought it was fantastic, other than the CGI Fox, which was terrible. But the point is that it is useful. These things are useful, and just writing off the audience score as trolls, fake fans, etc., 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 is fucking ridiculous. It's demeaning to all the fans who actually do have issues with this. And my issues with this, as a fan and a critic, my issues with this show are not that there are women or minorities. I think it's hilarious that they killed off effectively all the white characters, and it's like they were asking to start a culture flame war, right? This was all like part of the plan. We'll build up our audio or build up our viewership numbers by starting a flame war with fans. But then the press white knights and goes to town arguing that all these fans who are upset by things like the ridiculous premise, the promise of this show is a gritty police drama in the Star Wars universe, right? And it's not gritty, and there's hardly any actual investigation stuff going on. So I think sometimes the fan reviews are the only place that you can actually get the truth. And I think that's especially true when there's a lot of DEI stuff, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusivity. Because so much, see, I'm a huge fan of diversity, right? I'm a promoter of diversity. I want more diversity in Hollywood. I want especially more diverse stories to be told, right? I like that we're getting stuff like Reservation Dogs, which is about Native American kids, on the reservation in the middle America, right? I love that we're getting so many different perspectives, and I think that's great even within fandom. I would like a diverse array of different Star Wars shows and so on and so forth, and I think there's room for female and male Jedis and for white and black and all that. But when you do it, when it's done in this sort of faux corporate diversity 2.0 checkbox way, that's when it starts to bother me, and I think that's when that authenticity is missing, and that's when so many people respond negatively and are, a lot of people just reflexively say, oh, that's woke, and that's also stupid and thoughtless, right? But I think there is something about fraudulent material that we can just sniff out, right? And I think that that's important to notice. Like, I think it's important, like something like Night Country, right? That had a lot of Native American stuff in it, right? In True Detective Night Country. And the thing is that to me, it felt deeply inauthentic. Like, I live in a place with lots and lots of Native American people. My son, who's about to turn 14, the majority of his friend group are actually Native American or some sort of mixed Native American and Hispanic. Like, literally, like when he has a sleepover here, there'll probably be 4 or 5 kids who are, out of 6 or 7 who are Native American, mostly Navajo or Dene. I kind of get the feeling that the creator of Night Country had never really actually been around very many indigenous Americans when they wrote that show, and they committed every sin of well, not every sin, but a lot of sins of misrepresentation of the Native American characters in that show, who felt deeply inauthentic. And it felt like somebody who was just like a tourist and like coming by and trying to write about a culture they didn't understand. And that, even if you don't understand, I think inauthenticity comes through. And certainly to me, that show felt extremely racist with all the Noble Savage stuff, the suicide stuff, like handled it like it's this almost glorifying of suicide. Like there were so many things that were, I thought, pretty offensive. And yet critics couldn't critique that show on that level. Like, it's too scary as a critic to criticize diversity and inclusion stuff. It's like plot armor. You make a show like that, you have armor that defends you from critics, because if they say anything, they risk being called bigots. They risk getting in trouble. And that's why people, I think, are always a little surprised when I come out and I say this stuff, because, you know, I'm sorry, but being a critic, you're supposed to tell the truth about something, right? The truth of your own heart and the truth of the world and how you view it, you know, through your own lens, obviously. But with Night Country, with this show, there's so much inauthenticity. There's so much that comes across as forced or as trying too hard in a lot of ways. Whereas something like Andor, on the other hand, or like season 3 of True Detective, has a lot of diversity, has a lot of different, characters of different genders, all that stuff, but comes across as genuine and sincere and real. That's what people want. They want things to feel genuine and sincere and real. They want their stories to be about real people that they can relate to. They don't want it to be this forced bullshit. Now, there are times when I don't even care. Like, if you're trying to tell some goofy show, if you're doing something goofy like The Great on Hulu, which is historical revisionism and just upfront and blatant about it, or this new show My Lady Jane on Amazon, which I actually really liked, those shows have, you know, black characters in roles that they would never be black in true history. But they're not trying to tell a true history. They're not trying to do that. It's just part of the whole thing. Gallivant, whatever. There's a lot of different sort of goofy, ahistorical period shows, and I'm fine with that. What bothers me is when you're doing something serious. You're trying to actually do something historically serious, like Vikings Valhalla, and you have, you know, a female black Jarl. Like, I'm sorry, that's stupid. I wouldn't want to see some white dude being the chieftain of an African tribe in a serious historical drama either. So, anyways, enough about that, enough ranting. Just wanted to say that audience scores do matter, and continue to put your voice out there and your honest opinion on these shows, hopefully without being cruel or, you know, coming off as a idiot troll or racist or misogynist, because I think the problem with these shows isn't the diversity, it's how that is implemented. It is how that these really big corporations are pushing diversity really as a marketing gimmick. It's demeaning to everybody, and ultimately I think it's going to lose Disney and other companies that go this route a lot of money. And I think it will hurt the cause of having a more diverse entertainment industry and more diverse array of stories. I think it ultimately hurts that cause, because people get so defensive and they start to get repulsed by what they're seeing as fake more than anything. So, thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, be sure to leave a comment, and peace.